Okay, it's time to take a trip back to 1998, where we see the release of Konami's Metal Gear Solid and Hideo Kojima's first time delving into the 3D world. Snap forward 21 years and you're right where I am, and also where you are and where everyone else is, which is the present day. It's time to take a look at Metal Gear Solid and see how it stands up today. Welcome to a really retro review of Metal Gear Solid. So let's take a moment to first discuss the very first opening section of the game, this screen here. This has to be one of the most nostalgic melodies from my childhood. Yes, I'm aware that the game wasn't intended to be played by children, but you know, I'm an absolute rebel. Sorry, Mum. I don't know if the simplicity of the way the music was written for games back then or the way it was adjusted to be compatible with the PlayStation's hardware. Either way, I honestly believe soundtracks to the games in the 90s and early 2000s were much superior to the games now. I'm not saying all modern games are bad by any means. In fact, I'm willing to back up the soundtracks to games like Final Fantasy XIII-2, which weren't generally well received following the change of composer in the Final Fantasy franchise at the time. So you move on to the menu where you're presented with a few options including VR missions, but for now we'll just be focusing on the main story and the gameplay aspects that come with that. Enter Solid Snake.
That's what some people call me.
Voiced by the legendary David Hayter, a man with a voice so rugged that he makes Giggs look like a little girl. Now, I did say I'd be looking at how the game stands up today, and there's no better way than starting with the story and the voice acting, as I've already started talking about it. And let's just say that Konami and the voice actors they brought in here can hold their heads up pretty damn high. Honest to God, there are games being released now, and I'm sure there's games to be released soon, that don't have voice acting anywhere near as good as this. And they don't even have proper mouths in the game. I mean, they look like creepy voodoo dolls or Ryan Reynolds in X-Men Origins. Look, the Metal Gear Solid audio won't be anywhere near as polished by today's standards, and that's to be expected considering we are talking about a game that's over 2 decades old now. I mean, are the characters cheesy? Yes. Are their voices cheesy? Yes. But look at the early Bond movies. They were cheesy as hell, but are still some of the most well-respected movies to this day. And it's the same here with Metal Gear. Phenomenal voice acting pretty much across the board, with perhaps the exception of Liquid Snake's bad accent.
All on the verge of death at the genetic level. We don't know when or what type of disease will occur.
But that's just a small nitpick. And that's really all I have to say on the matter. Hashtag bring back hater. The story is banging, alright? Classic terrorist plot story to destroy the world, yada yada yada. Some long and quite frankly unnecessary cutscenes, but after recently playing through Kingdom Hearts, I've definitely become more forgiving of that. Not much more to say. Don't honestly think it would hold up by today's standards, but I think that's just simply because a lot of this cheesy kind of classic stories have been done now, and at the time they might not have all been done, so yeah. The story's simple enough where a young audience could let it go over their heads and enjoy the gameplay, but it's interesting enough to draw in an older audience still who will enjoy it for both the story and the gameplay. Hashtag bring back Hideo. So where were we? Alright, so you start with the opening cinematic and pretty much our first look at the game's graphics, and well, they're acceptable, I guess? I mean, it's difficult to judge them unless you go back and play a multitude of PlayStation titles to compare them to, but from what I remember they were decent, I think. I mean, there were other games around at similar-ish times that jumped from looking like this to looking like this. So I'm pretty happy to say this is somewhere in the middle. It might even actually be slightly above that for its time. You have moments where you look at it and think, yeah, that's not too bad, and then it doesn't look so great other times, like, what the fuck is this? I honestly don't know. The environments and surroundings tend to hold up alright, but the character models are sketchy at the best of times. You can't say that any original PlayStation title holds up to today's standards because, well, they just don't. I mean, you've got this, and they're just light years apart in terms of being playable graphics in 2019. Yeah, I still managed to play through it from start to finish without any major cringing. The story and voice acting pulls you in enough to detract away from the smushed together polygons, which is a real plus. So at this point, I'm quite happy to give the graphics a pass. They were good enough for the time and still coexist alongside a playable game by today's standards. Speaking of playable games, let's talk about the game's controls and cameras, shall we? I'd like to talk in depth about the camera, but there isn't all that much to say. It wasn't exactly common at the time for a game to offer alternative viewpoints. You can switch between first person and a bird's eye view in a restrictive sense. You can't actually play through the game in first person, but you can use it mostly freely, and there are times when you genuinely need it, but the game obviously wasn't designed this way, and you can tell. As for the general kind of top-down perspective you experience for the majority of the game, it's okay. I mean, if you didn't have the radar, it would be a frustrating or challenging experience to say the least, but considering the game was created with the radar in mind, the two work hand in hand. So, fair play, but if there's anything about this game that makes it feel dated, with the exception of a scary voodoo Ryan Reynolds here, it's the controls, and they are just so bad. Even for the time, these must have been frustrating. Walking around with the analog sticks is all well and good, mostly smooth movement, but everything else is borderline painful, and not everyone had analog sticks on their controllers back then. Like, what is going on with the aiming? It's almost as if you can only fire in exact pre-programmed coordinates, and if the enemy decides to go for, a little stroll around, you spend a couple of seconds adjusting yourself just so you can point the gun to where they've moved to, and it could literally be a matter of feet. Does the game have aim assist? Doesn't the game have aim assist? I honestly don't know. There were times where I could hold my gun out and spam square to shoot and plough through 3 enemies quite spectacularly. And then there were times where I'd be hitting nothing but thin air, only to be knocked to the ground and have to wait 3 or 4 seconds before I could stand up, and then be knocked straight back to the ground again. A lot like my life. The controls, they're garbage. I don't know how I coped as a child. I completed this game so many times in my early days that I knew it off by heart, from start to finish. I mean, I even remembered that you can do this at the mine section before the sniper wolf fight, instead of following Meryl's stupid submarine shape and narrowly avoiding getting my leg blown off. But if it wasn't for the story and nostalgia, I don't think I'd put myself through the experience of those primitive controls again. But you know what isn't primitive? Hideo Kojima. In 1998, the game industry was on a real upward surge. Big budget games were becoming the norm, and companies were starting to churn out a variety of titles, breaking free from the classic gaming constraints of the 80s and early 90s, and yet still, Kojima and the Konami team managed to bring something thoroughly unique to the table. Small details like different character interactions based on how you approached a situation, or Psycho Mantis' evaluation of your gameplay before you fight him, even switching to the controller port 2 to gain an advantage in combat, all add up to what is truly an innovative gaming experience, whether it be in 1998 or 2019. You have different options and outcomes available despite not being presented with the obvious alternatives. For example, when Otacon comes by with the ketchup, the usual goal here is to make yourself look injured so the guard comes in to help you. But instead, you can choose to hide from the guard under the bed and retain those items. Not that I remember them serving much purpose later in the game, but it's still an alternative. Metal Gear Solid is a perfect example of how difficulty and variety can be presented in a game without physically adjusting the settings. There's no blatantly obvious tutorials, and any information that is necessary is presented to you by the other characters in the game in a sort of breaking the fourth wall type manner. I mean, take a look at this from the beginning of the game.
The bright dot in the middle is you, Snake. The red dots are your enemies, and the blue cone shape represents their field of vision.
And that is it. That's the entire tutorial you get on the subject, and it works. You don't need any more than that. Today's games absolutely baby you through the early stages. Metal Gear just gets it right. Here's how you do this, go and use it how you see fit, and that's honestly how it should be. It gives the player a sense of freedom and a chance to learn from their mistakes that a lot of modern games don't give you. Before I summarise here, I'd like to make a few honourable mentions that I haven't spoken about yet that put this game and Hideo's ideas way ahead of their time. different rewards on New Game Plus based on how well you do in the torture chamber, use of thermal goggles to combat stealth gear, being told Meryl's codec numbers on the back of the bloody CD case, being forced into a sniper fight with Sniper Wolf, but choosing to kill whoever Nikita instead, hiding from enemies in cardboard boxes relevantly labelled depending on what area you're in, smoking cigarettes to reveal lasers, backtracking to connect items that were previously unreachable without the corresponding keycard. For some reason, Meryl in her underwear, I don't understand why this bit was necessary, but it's there. Throwing enemies over railings even though you were otherwise unable to interact with any railings in the game, using a handkerchief to stop the walls attacking you, the way the codec system looks like something from the Matrix but stays so simple and effective, going back to different environments with varying temperatures to get the keycard to change form, and this is just off the top of my head. So, to summarise, how does it hold up? The story, 7 out of 10. The gameplay, 7 out of 10. The graphics, 6 out of 10. The Hideo Kojima effect, 9 out of 10. And overall, it's an 8 out of 10. For everything else, there's MasterCard. Thanks for watching my second video reviewing a game. This was a retro review of Metal Gear Solid. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe, and I'll be uploading more content soon. Thanks.